Well, for better or worse, there's always one. You never want to embarrass anyone. It's a shame that she isn't here tonight. But I was thinking Shannon and the group of sisters. Shannon Clark is who I had. There's always one. There's always one that stands out. And that's going to be the case in our Bible lesson tonight in 2 Samuel 20. Good evening, by the way. It's good to see everybody. Have a really good crowd, especially weather considered. But we're getting some good melting in. So I think that's really helped. So we're going to be in 2 Samuel chapter 20. And if you'll recall where we left off in 19, David has been restored as the king of Israel, or at least the process is going on for that to transpire. But our one who's going to stand out tonight is a pesky fella whose name is Sheba. But to set the stage for our discussion in chapter 20, if you don't mind, I'd actually like to go back to 19 just to reread the last few verses. We covered those very quickly last week. And I want us to recall where we are here and what's going on. So, David has approached the Jordan River. I'm going to show our map. And you probably remember that he's been staying and had his makeshift capital set up in Mahanaim. And the battle takes place in the forest of Ephraim with his son. And tragically, his son dies in that. Of course, that's what he deserved. But, nevertheless, it's really just a sad scene. But things shift, and he travels, after this, the threat is over, he travels down to the southwest, and he has approached the Jordan River, and that's just about where we left off. So at the end of 19, in verse 40, things are, about to be reconciled, hunky-dory. However, verse 40, the king went on to Gilgal, and that's just north of the Dead Sea and on the west side of the Jordan River. And so he's approached it from the east, and he crosses over to Gilgal, or is about to do so anyway. He went on to Gilgal, and Kimham, if you recall, Barzillai is the aged man. He's 80 years old. And Barzillai had been a real friend to David and to his forces whenever they'd come over. They had to leave Jerusalem in a hurry. And they come over, and they don't have the adequate supplies, the things that they need, and he takes care of those needs there. Well, the king says, I want to repay the favor, and I'd like to take you over with me. Let's go to Jerusalem, and kind of a setup like Mephibosheth. I take care of you for the rest of your life. And he says, thank you, sir, but I'm 80 years old. My food doesn't taste as good as what it once did. I can't hear beautiful voices singing all that well anymore. I can't see very well. Where you live is great. You have a wonderful home, but it's not my home. Let me stay at home and die. But I do have a favor to ask of you. Is it possible that my descendant, perceivably a son, maybe grandson, but is it okay if Kimham, my descendant, comes over with you and receives all of this positive treatment? And the king tells him, hey, after everything you've done for me, you name the price, you name the favor, and I do it for you. So the king went on to Gilgal, and Kimham, that's the descendant of Barzillai, the aged man, he went on with him. And all the people of Judah escorted the king, and also half of the people of Israel. Now, why might this be a little bit of a surprising detail that the people of Judah, all of them, are on board and help escorting the king back over into the promised land proper? Why might that be a little bit surprising? What do we know about the people of Judah recently? And go ahead, if you're... And if it helps any, notice the close proximity of Judah to the capital city, of course to the west on the screen, but to the capital city, Jerusalem. And by the way, if you're wondering, well, I thought Jerusalem was in Judah. It kind of is. And if you see on the map, as you do right here, that Jerusalem is Benjamin, that's because it is also. It's a little bit tricky. I don't know that this is drawn just perfectly right here, but you look back in the land allotment in the book of Joshua, and Jerusalem, of course back then it's Jebus and it's possessed by the Jebusites. David finally takes it over and claims it as the capital. But it's actually a part of the territory of Benjamin. But there's a Jewish tradition that the altar and the sanctuary of Jerusalem, and of course the temple once it's built, that it lay in Benjamin, but on the other side of things, that you have the courts of the temple that was actually technically found in Judah. And so I think that's why both are probably correct, and you read it that way in Scripture. It's just a borderline city. Jerusalem is for Benjamin and for Judah. But I bring that up simply to say that, of course, Jerusalem, being that border town partly found in each territory, who was just ruling in Judah, a few days back? Absalom was. They're part of the rebellion to overthrow the king. And they don't know how this is going to work out now that their guy is gone and David is reassuming the throne. They're kind of, caught in limbo. They're like, well, what do we do here? And that's when David attempts, and successfully so, to sue things over and to reunite. And by the way, what's his strategy, it seems, to do that? To bring Israel back into unity. And you have the rebels, and it's not, hey, we're going to chase you to the ends of the earth. All of you are going to be executed. Let's just all come back together as a people once again. And it's all water under the bridge. And what decision, very key, that David makes in appointing somebody to a very important position? Go ahead, Emily. No, so it's Amasa, okay? And that's important because Amasa was serving as the commander in the commander over Absalom's army. So this is a strategic decision, no doubt, and he brings him over in this effort to reunite. And remember how powerful and how much sway those military generals have. And Amasa is that. He easily gets all the men of Judah back over and decide with David. And it's impressive that in such a short time span, all the people of Judah, those who had rebelled against the king, they're united together and they help escort the king and also half of the people of Israel. That's strange, though, not all of the people of Israel. Just then, verse 41 of 19, verse 41, that just then all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, why have our brethren, the men of Judah, stolen you away? You're our king. We're on your side. We have been. And brought the king, his household, and all David's men with him across the Jordan. It's almost like they're upset that there's unity in the country. That's interesting. And you look at our land today, it seems like there are some efforts to keep division in our land instead of trying to actively bring everyone together. It's almost like they liked and they wanted this division. But one thing's for sure, they wanted the honor of being the ones to escort in unity the king back over to his throne. Verse 42, here's the response. So all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, because the king, here's why we did this, because the king is a close relative of ours. The people of Judah, reminder, from what place does David come? What's the name of the town? Where is he born? In Bethlehem. Remember the ancestry involved. And later on down the line, Jesus and where it is that he's born in the city of David. So they're saying, hey, we're quite literally close in blood. He comes from our very tribe. And that's why it's so important to them. That's why we've done this. Why then are you angry over this matter? Have we ever eaten at the king's expense? Or has he given us any gift? Do we have any economic benefit in the actions that we're performing? The king hasn't hired us. He hasn't promised to give us anything. We're giving of our own effort. We're spending our own money to provide this kindness to the king. Verse 43, the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, well, we have 10 shares in the king. Therefore, we also have more right to David than you. He's more of our king than yours. 10. Okay? So they mean there are 10 of us tribes that are in agreement. And we've seen this from hundreds of years back. There has been this geographical, and in many cases, political divide in Israel for so long. And once again, I'd say in our own country, I find it fascinating that from today, you look back hundreds of years, and we can trace the same divide in this country all the way back there to what it is that we still have today. For the Israelites, it was kind of the northern versus the southern. And it so happens in America, hundreds of years ago, and much of which continues today. There's been a pretty big divide in north and also in south. This continues on, and there are some skirmishes because of this. Again, we've seen the same thing in our own nation's history, but they say we have 10 shares, or 10 tribes. So that would leave how many tribes siding down there? We typically only talk about one. Of course, the major one is Judah that we're discussing, but what's the other one that we sometimes forget? And it's a small tribe. Makes a lot of sense. Okay, very good. And as you can see, it makes geographical sense also. Go ahead, Paul. Yeah, right. And within Judah, I know. Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but yeah, they tend to, it seems to side elsewhere. So, but it does make sense as far as the close proximity, and Benjamin's not very large, and they tend to stay banded together. We'll see if that's the case tonight. So we have 10 shares. We outnumber you guys 5-1. He's 5 times more our king than he is yours, being like petty children. Why then do you despise us? Were we not the first to advise bringing back our king? We did the right thing first, and you should have been on track. It's kind of like those that are upset in the parable of the kingdom and working out in the field and the rewards. Hey, wait a minute. We've been doing this much longer. Shouldn't we have more, is the idea. So similar here. We were doing the right thing for longer, yet the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. Or maybe they believe stronger in the cause, that could mean, or it might be things are about to get ugly. All right, let's cross over into chapter 20, which is where our discussion is found today. So in chapter 20, remember, there's one in every group. And our one tonight is a guy by the name of Sheba. Verse 1, and there happened to be there a rebel. There's one in every group. This one stands out. Whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjamite. And, okay, wait a minute. He's a what again? He's a Benjamite. Okay, so as we look back at our territory, all right, this is someone who has some roots in the area of Jerusalem and just north of Judah. There's close proximity there. This Benjamite named Sheba, the son of Bichri, blew a trumpet and said, we have no share in David, meaning we're not going to accept this guy back. And he's speaking for the whole group here. He says, we're not going to accept this guy back as he's coming back in, nor do we have inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel. All right, who would like to do our memory honors from verse 2? 2 Samuel 20, verse 2. Okay? So, every man of Israel deserted David. Okay, I want us to pause. I know it's a memory verse, but I want us to pause right there. Every man of Israel deserted David. So we're talking about Israel here. What's that going to be? And remember, there's kind of that divide with which we're working here. How many tribes? 10 tribes have left. That's considerable. 10 out of 12. So every man of Israel deserted David and followed instead, it's apparent, this guy has some prowess. They followed Sheba, the son of Bichri. And it's mentioned, but in contrast, the geographical divide, the men of Judah from the Jordan as far as Jerusalem remain loyal to their king. And once again, we see that divide that's coming into play. But this is kind of interesting how things have flip-flopped. Because initially, it was whenever it was, Saul passed from the scene. Initially, it's the tribe of Judah that accepts David as king, and it's Israel who rejects him. Well, then when the rebellion comes about, it's, mainly initially Judah that rejects David. And then it's time for him to come home, and Judah's not sure if they want to accept him back, and Amasa helps to smooth things over. And now we see, days, it appears later, that Judah is showing fidelity to their king, and now Israel has flip-flopped. In case you haven't picked up in the last several hundred years, Israel is a mess. And I think things are really held together here by a great king who's had a lot of personal blunders the last several years to come into his life. Things are going to largely be held together by the reign of another great king. But then the kings start to follow a lot more suit of their people. But right now, things have flip-flopped again. The people of Judah remain loyal to their king. But other than that, every man, all Israel, deserts David. Verse 3. Now David came to his house at Jerusalem. So he's arrived back home. And I'm going to switch back to our other map. So he's left Mahanaim, he's crossed over to Gilgal, and now he's back in the capital city that he took from the Jebusites himself in Jebus. And the king took the 10 women, his concubines, whom he had left to keep the house. And he put them in seclusion, and he supported them. All right, so it's not like, locking them away and leaving them to starve or anything. He takes care of whatever their needs are, but he does not go into them again. So they were shut up till the day of their death, living in widowhood. These are David's concubines, remember, just as a refresher here. What are concubines? I'm sorry? Okay. Some could see that, yeah. Technically, they're spouses, okay, but yeah, they're not viewed as highly as primary, that's for sure. All right, so these are secondary wives, and it mentions here that he sends them off, 10 of his own secondary wives, to live in widowhood, as if they don't have a husband. But aren't they married to David? What's happened with these ladies who were left behind in the house? Who could tell us that? Okay, they were defiled by Absalom whenever he took it. Remember, he sets the tent up on top of the house and everything that goes on there. This actually has to do with law. Turn back to Leviticus. Keep your spot, obviously, but turn back to Leviticus 20. And I'd like for us to read just a few select verses from here. Leviticus 20 and verse 11, starting. So the law was given through Moses, again, verse 11 of Leviticus 20. If a man lies with his father's wife, he has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. I'm not going to turn over to Deuteronomy and to read from that. There is a provision that's built in if something's not consensual and somebody is forced. And so that could be part of what's in play here. But skip down to verse 17 as far as, the lady's not dying from what's taken place. Verse 17, same location. If a man takes his sister, a daughter of his father, a daughter of his mother, and sees her nakedness, and she sees his nakedness, it's a disgrace. And they shall be cut off in the sight of the children, their people. I'll go down to verses 19 through 21. And you shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, your father's sister, for that is made that is to make naked one's relative. They shall bear their iniquity. If a man lies with his uncle's wife, he has uncovered his uncle's nakedness. They shall bear their sin. They shall die childless. If a man takes his brother's wife, it is impurity, is uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. Okay, so you have this big, long list of rules involving incest and the law of Moses. And, you talk about different people that are involved, but some of the punishments that are brought out is that if this has taken place, they're not to have children through them. And also that they're to essentially be put away from their people or to live in exile. And it seems like that's the same thing that happens with Amnon and Tamar. Of course, Amnon's put to death. But Tamar has to live in seclusion and not have children then the rest of her life. And so there's some unfortunate consequences of that. But going back to our text, whenever we read this, it's like, well, why would he do that to them, put them in seclusion? He still takes care of them, but he doesn't have kids through them from this point moving forward. I think that's a fulfillment of the law that was given in Leviticus 20. So verse 4, back in our passage. And the king said to Amasa. Now Amasa is the one who has recently become the new commander of the armed forces. The king said to Amasa, assemble the men of Judah for me within 3 days and present yourself here. I want us to turn back, you might not even need to in your text, but to chapter 19 And let's refresh ourselves as to the events here. Chapter 19, verses 11 through 14. So King David sent to Zadok and Abiathar, who were the priests, saying, "Speak to the elders of Judah, saying, Why are you the last to bring the king back to his house, since the words of all Israel have come to the king to his very house? You are my brethren. You are my bone and my flesh." And we talked about why, I don't still have it up on the map, but Bethlehem, David's hometown, is a part of Judah. So quite literally, they're brethren of the same tribe. And he says, "Why then are you the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, Are you not my bone and my flesh? God do so to me and more also, if you are not commander of the army before me continually." And David is sure to communicate this message in place of Joab. So he swayed the hearts of all the men of Judah, just as the heart of one man, so that they sent this word to the king, "Return you and all your servants," and that's what happens. It seems perhaps that the king is upset with Joab, and for good reason. What's Joab recently done? Two things that recently stand out, and there's a long history between these two. They've had a lot of good memories and a lot of success together, but Joab's never been known for perfectly following the orders of the king. He kind of has his own mind about him. He has his own power and his own following, and I think some of it's probably ego. What has Joab recently done that probably greatly irritated the king, to say the least? In fact, I think you could say probably infuriated him. Number one, he'd given strict orders, the king had. Do not harm the man, if at all possible. And he's hanging from the tree, from his beautiful 5 pounds of locks. He's no harm in that state right there. Now again, does he deserve it? Absolutely. But nevertheless, the king had given orders, do not harm the young man. If in any way possible, he could have spared him, no issue. And when he found out the guys had followed the king's order and left him, he went back and he threw 3 spears into his heart. And then he had the boys to finish him off. And that's one thing. And the second thing is this. When David was really mourning his son, Joab in no uncertain terms raked him over the coals for how he had disrespected his men and needed to go out there essentially and to thank him and tell him the great thing that he had done. I'm sure that probably had an effect on David's heart also. And again, there's history between the two. So David sends out this decree to Amasa. He says, "You are going to be commander of the armed forces before me continually, indefinitely." This is permanent. "In place of Joab." I'm done with him, is what the king has said. And I say that to say this as we go back to our text of chapter 20. The king said to Amasa, "Assemble the men of Judah for me within 3 days, and then be present here yourself." So Amasa has this job that he's performing for the king. Who was just performing this job a few days ago and had been faithfully, quote unquote, for decades for David? But Joab. How do you think Joab feels not only about his replacement, again, after decades of serving the king, but also to be spoken of publicly in front of everyone by the king as he has? I think there's probably some animosity that's hiding in Joab's heart. The king gives orders to Amasa, "Get the troops ready, those of Judah, and within 3 days I need it, and be back here yourself." So Amasa went to assemble the men of Judah. But he delayed longer than the set time which David had appointed him. You think Joab might have gotten all the troops together in 3 days and been back when the king said? You never know. When you're putting somebody new in charge and you give them an assignment, maybe there's some halfway legitimate excuse Amasa had, but one thing's for sure, the order isn't exactly carried out as the king directed it. Verse 6, "And David said to Abishai," all right, pause here and let's remind ourselves, who is Abishai in this big picture? Okay, good. Now he's keeping all this together. I don't know if I struggle. I don't do it as well as he does. So that's Joab's brother. And you also had Asahel, who's already fallen, and we're going to talk about him in a minute. But you have these 3 sons of Zeruiah. You have Abishai, Asahel, who's already expired, and then also Joab. So David said to Abishai, who's another key figure in David's armed forces and a leader among them, that's the brother of Joab, now Sheba, the son of Bichri, will do us more harm than Absalom. And I think he's genuine here when he says this, and that's saying something. Absalom ran the king and his men out of the capital city. They had to flee for their life. David almost died because of that. He, for a time, really split the kingdom because of it. And he says, this guy, David speaking, this guy Sheba, he's more of a threat than Absalom ever was to us. Take your Lord's servants and pursue him. We've got to take care of this guy, lest he find for himself fortified cities and escape us. So time's of the essence, and we got to get on this. And remember, he told Amasa that you're going to have to do this in 3 days, and you got to report back here, and we got to go take care of this. He's tardy. So David says to a guy he can trust, Abishai, hey, we got to get this taken care of. Verse 7, so Joab's men with the Kerethites and the Pelethites. And if you'll recall from previous chapters, these are basically the secret service of the king. One of them serves more in a protecting role for David, and the other one's more goes out and takes care of business. They're kind of more like the trained assassins. Seems like they probably have some Philistine background. But Joab's men with the Kerethites and the Pelethites and all the mighty men went out after him. And they went out of Jerusalem to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. When they were at the large stone, which is in Gibeon, Amasa came before them. All right, so the scene has shifted. If you go just up to the north here, not very far, just a few miles southwest, maybe about 5 to 8 miles northwest of Jerusalem. So that's the meeting place here, the large stone in Gibeon. Amasa came before them. Now Joab was dressed in battle armor. On it was a belt with a sword fastened in its sheath at his hips. And as he was going forward, it, just casually fell out. Okay, let's not forget who Joab is. This guy has been killing people and in these battles. You never think he's going to come out and others alive, and he always does. You think someone as couth as what Joab is would just casually just lose his weapon? That might not be an accident. Verse 9. Then Joab said to Amasa, okay, so former commander of the army to the new commander of the army, are you in health, my brother? And Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. Now I want us to turn back really quickly to chapter 3. 2 Samuel, the 3rd chapter. There's a similar scene to this when Joab meets with an important guy who's a commander and one-on-one. 2 Samuel 3, verses 26 and 27. When Joab came out from David's presence, he sent messengers after Abner. Now, this is significant because Abner was the former commander of the rebel forces, those in the north, and he and David had now formed an alliance, and they've agreed we're going to be on the same team. And remember, the commanders, they're the power players, and he says, I'm going to bring all Israel over to follow you. This is way back early on in the yesteryears, shortly after David becomes king, 7 years initially into his reign. So Joab, the commander of David's army, came out from David's presence. He sent messengers after Abner, once this alliance between David and Abner had been formed. And they brought him back from the cistern of Sirah, but David did not know about it. And when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into the midst of the gate to speak with him privately. He has a history of doing this with people. What happens here? And there he struck him in the stomach so that he died for the blood of Asahel, his brother. Verse 30. So Joab and Abishai, his brother, killed Abner because he had put their brother Asahel to death in the battle of Gibeon. All right, we're going to turn back to our text now. And we have a case of two commanders, one of them being Joab. He likes to do this and have private consultations with other commanders connected to Israel. And so he says, "Are you in health, my brother?" And Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. But Amasa did not notice the sword that was in Joab's hand. And he struck him with it in the stomach, and his guts poured out on the ground. And he did so effectively enough, he did not have to strike him again. Then he died. So Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued Sheba, the son of Bichri. All right, so this is the second time that Joab has done this. And by this, I mean, has killed a man, it seems, in cold blood. They're on the same side. Okay, so let's back up. You don't just murder someone because, I think I'll go out and murder someone today. That's very rarely in the history of the world has ever such a thing happened. What's the motive for Joab? Why would you do that? You guys aren't even on opposite sides right now. Just out of the blue, just stabs this guy in the stomach and does away with him. Power. Remember what's recently happened. I think that Joab is a little salty right now. I think he's upset because of the embarrassment that the king has caused him. And this is the guy that has taken his place. Okay, it's crazy that he does what he does on those grounds. They're on the same side, okay? Second reason, though, anybody recall the connection between these two? Joab and Amasa? Turn back to chapter 17. Say that again, I'm sorry.
Someone was talking to Joab, telling Joab not to harm Absalom.
Right. I don't believe so. No, I don't think it was, and good question. I don't believe it was at that point. But going back to chapter 17, John, there is a connection between these two that we know. Verse 25, now Absalom had set Amasa over the army instead of Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Ithra, the Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. That's the one I mentioned to you a couple of weeks back. That took me a while to sort through that and reread it, and I about just had to draw a picture to figure out what was. I didn't, but I think I finally figured out. It seems that's a long way of saying that these two are first cousins. I believe that's it. So it's not just the fact in chapter 20 that Joab has murdered this man. Whenever they're on the same side, they are close family members. And yet he takes him out, I think, because he's angry and because he wants that position of power back that he once had. Then Joab and Abishai, these guys are always together. We read earlier, whenever they murder Abner, it's not just Joab, but it's also Abishai who is a part in this plot. And these two, through thick and thin, they're still working their ways together. Verse 11, meanwhile, one of Joab's men stood near Amasa and said, whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, follow Joab. There's only one issue, verse 12. But Amasa, and this is a sad statement, but Amasa wallowed in his blood. The most powerful man as far as the armed forces goes, and so much promise, and he's just lying there on the ground in misery, just trying to finish dying. But Amasa wallowed in his blood in the middle of the highway. And when a man, saw that all the people stood still, in other words, they're not going to go past to join Joab because here's their commander who's just been murdered by the guy, he moved Amasa from the highway to the field. And I don't know if that's graciously that they did so. They might have just tossed his body out there because he's a hindrance to them and what they're trying to accomplish. And threw a garment over the top of him when he saw that everyone who came upon him halted. Once more, I ask you to turn back to chapter 2 and the first murderous event of Joab. Chapter 2, and let's read verses 18 through 23. Then the sons of Zeruiah were there, the three sons, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. And Asahel was as swift as foot as a wild gazelle. Remember, he's the quick one. And Asahel pursued Abner, and as he went, he turned neither to the right nor the left from following. Abner looked behind him and he said, "Is it you, Asahel?" He said, "It is I." And he said, "Turn aside to the left or to the right. Seize one of the young men, take his spoil," but he wouldn't listen to him. Abner said again, "Turn aside from following me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How could I lift my face to your brother Joab?" But he refused to turn aside. Therefore Abner struck him, that's the brother of Joab, struck him, Asahel, in the stomach with the butt of his spear, so that the spear came out at his back. And there he fell and died where he was, and all the people who came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died stood still. I don't know if Joab ever lets this scene leave his mind. And in these cases, first one, whenever he gets revenge, he stabs the guy in the stomach, just like before. And the second episode, he stabs the guy in the stomach, just like his own brother had received. And it's strange that the very sight there was that people would come by and, they couldn't stand to pass by with Asahel, Joab's brother, there dead. Joab's recreated this scene himself, where people won't pass by and join forces with him because he's done the same thing to another as was done to his own brother. Could be. Joab is Joab Incorporated. Whatever it takes to get people on my side. And so he does that, and maybe that's enough. Is it? Verse 13, when he was removed from the highway, all the people went on after Joab to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. All right, so he's successful. And everyone's following the leader, once again, just like Joab wanted. Verse 14, and he went throughout all the tribes of Israel to Abel and Beth Maacah. And if you look up at the very top of the screen, you got to go way up for this one, almost at the top right. So you have Abel, and some would see that together. They're so close, Abel, Maacah. So he went through all the tribes all the way up to the north, and also all the Berites, which seem to be some sort of sub-tribe. So they were gathered together and also went after Sheba. Now, I know we spent a lot of time talking about Joab and his terrible deeds, which is really sad in the chapter of a rebel and a traitor like Sheba. But that kind of gives you an idea as to the character, yet again, of Joab. So verse 15, then they came and besieged him in Abel of Beth Maacah, and they cast up a siege mound against the city, and it stood by the rampart, the fortification. And all the people who were with Joab battered the wall to try to throw it down. Then a wise woman cried out from the city, "Hear, hear, please say to Joab, come nearby that I may speak with you." When he'd come near to her, the woman said, "Are you Joab?" He answered, "I am." Then she said to him, "Hear the words of your maidservant." And he answered, "I'm listening." You can just see the patience of Joab and his talent in communicating shining. I could see him saying, "Come on, lady, we got something to do here. What do you want to talk to me about?" "I'm listening. What do you got?" So she spoke, saying, "They used to talk in former times, saying, they shall surely seek guidance at Abel," which is the town where this lady is from and where the forces are right now. "And so they would end disputes. They would settle things without having to fight," in other words. And she says, that's what we'd like to do here. "Listen, I'm among the peaceable and the faithful in Israel. You seek to destroy a city among God's people, and you seek to destroy a mother in Israel. Why would this be wise on the lady's part?" Do you think Joab seems to have much of a conscience? Doesn't appear that way. But if any man is going to find an ounce of goodness within him, it might be in reflecting on the relationship that he either enjoys or has enjoyed with his mother. And she says, in the process, you're going to destroy a mother in Israel. How would your mama feel about that? Essentially what she's asking. How would you feel if someone treated your own mom this way? This probably makes a guy without much of a conscience to reflect. She is undoubtedly a wise lady in this city. Why would you swallow up the inheritance of the Lord? Why would you mess up the land and the taking of it that God's given to his people? And Joab answered and said, far be it from me that I should swallow up or destroy. I don't destroy places. I don't destroy people. I'm not that kind of person. Probably a good thing this woman has lived hundreds of miles, or 100 plus miles away from this guy. That's exactly the kind of person that he is. He doesn't want to own it, but that's who he is. That is not so, though, he tells her, but a man from the mountains of Ephraim, Sheba, the son of Bichri by name, has raised his hand against the king, against David. Deliver him only, and I will depart from the city. You know, the peaceable man that Joab is. So the woman said to Joab, watch, his head will be thrown to you over the wall. I feel like this is neat, seeing the power players that we've been talking about. Abner controls northern Israel. Amasa controls Judah, even though there are kings that are in power. And Joab, even though he's been thrown out as commander, he still controls the army of God's people. And this is neat, though. This wise old woman in this town apparently has major sway over this entire town of her people. The woman said, watch, it's not going to be very long, and his head's going to be coming down to you from the top of the wall. Then the woman in her wisdom went to all the people, and they cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and threw it out to Joab. Then he blew a trumpet, true to his word. And they withdrew from the city, every man to his tent. So Joab returned to the king at Jerusalem. And Sheba and his rebellion are not going to be a concern moving forward. All right, verses 23 through 26, it seems like kind of a strange ending, considering what it is that we've just discussed. So Joab was over all the army of Israel. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and the Pelethites. Remember the king's secret service. Adoram was in charge of revenue. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was recorder. Sheva was scribe. Zadok, and Abiathar were the priests. And Ira the Jerite was a chief minister under David. I don't know if this would really stand out to anybody, but as we close, I ask you to turn back to chapter 8, because these people have already been listed for us earlier in the roles that they served. Back in chapter 8, and I'm not going to go through and reread these to you, but they're found in verses 16 through 18, with only two exceptions. Only two have changed by the time we get to where we are in chapter 20. So what do you think is the point of reestablishing essentially what we've already known for some time now? Who's ruling in these positions?
Or you would think that would be the first thing that would change.
Yeah, you'd think so. So there's some continuity, right? In a time maybe you wouldn't think. All right, further unity and getting back to normal. And I think that's a lot of it, Paul. Look in verse 15 of 2 Samuel 8. Right before leading into this, the point is this. So David reigned over all Israel, and David administered justice and equity to all his people. David's recently been kicked out of his kingdom, and I think what we're being told is the lead-in of the thought in chapter 8, but in chapter 20, David's reigning again over all Israel. David is administering justice and equity to all his people. And I think some of it has to be that David is returning to be the man that God chose to lead his people, the man after God's own heart. And so I think that could make a lot of sense too. Appreciate that comment, Paul. Okay, anything else as we close out from our discussion in chapter 20? So for next time, I ask you to read chapter 21, please. 21. And we're going to see if we can store away in our minds the last verse of it, 22. 2 Samuel 21, 22, talking about David's interaction with the Gibeonites. All right, so we'll do next week. Thanks.